Hello everyone, with Pixar 2 just releasing in theatres, it's time to rank all the Pixar movies, so let's get into it. So yes, we're going to rank all 28 movies from Pixar Studios. Now I know there's a whole bunch of shorts and all that, and small movies that they release, but we're focusing in on just the big releases, the full-length movies. But before we go into all of that, if you are new to the channel, do consider hitting that subscribe button, as I've done many tier ranking videos on the channel. I most recently just done all the Planet of the Apes tier ranking videos, so you can check that out somewhere on the channel over here. So if you like that type of stuff, do consider hitting that subscribe button, hit that like button, share the video, just all of that YouTube stuff. And timestamps will be in the description down below. So if there's any movies you're more interested in, any movies that you want to know where they're going to rank, timestamps will be in the description down below. But let's start showing you the screen. Okay, so as you can see, we've got all 28 Pixar movies as mentioned here, and this is how we're going to be ranking them. So quickly just going over this, you've got Pixar's gold standard, so the very best, top of the mountain Pixar movies. You've got one for the ages, one that I really enjoyed, one that I go back to rewatching, but I wouldn't consider it the best Pixar movies of all time. You've got good but not that great, so movies that I considered like a mid-tier kind of movies. You've got a one-time watch that I'm not angry that I've seen it, but I probably wouldn't go back and rewatch it. And then you've got I Wish I Had Dory's Memories, one I just really want to forget about completely. So these are how we're going to be ranking the movies, but this is just my thoughts, my opinions. Let me know yours in the comment section down below. How would you rank them? How do you disagree and agree with my ranking? Let me know down in the comment section below. But we'll start off with the very first movie on here. So the first one we're going to be talking about is Turning Red. This movie came out last year, I think it was, and I'll be honest, I don't think I'm the target audience for this, because it's about a teenage girl going through puberty, wanting to see a boy band with her friends. So something I cannot really relate to whatsoever for obvious reasons. And I'll be honest, this movie just really didn't do it for me, from just like the girl's personality and from like the fighting that she's having with her mother, to the point where she's twerking as a panda to her mother as rage or as trying to trigger. I honestly don't even know, but it just, for me, the movie just did not work. So while I know that some people did enjoy it, my wife actually watched the movie and enjoyed it more than I did. But for me, I just feel like this wasn't targeted for me, not a movie that I would go back to rewatching whatsoever. So this, for me, Turning Red, is going to be going as the first. I Wish I Had Dory's Memories, because I kind of want to forget I ever saw this movie. And for me, not one of the strongest Pixar movies they have produced. Okay, so next up on the list, we've got the Lightyear movie. This was supposed to be the next big thing when it comes to like Toy Story. This was supposed to be the movie that Andy saw as a kid, which made him want to get the Buzz Lightyear toy from the very first Toy Story movie. And just a brief history, this was my very first review I ever did on the channel, was the Buzz Lightyear or the Lightyear movie. You can actually go back, check that out. But upon rewatching this in the build-up to doing this ranking video, I'll be honest, this movie doesn't really hold up. Chris Evans, who was voicing Buzz Lightyear, did a fantastic job with this. The plot had a lot of potential, but if I'm going based off this being the movie that Andy saw to want to get Buzz Lightyear, I really don't see the hype with Andy wanting to get this toy. The movie felt flat in a lot of ways, and especially like the third act, it does look like they were setting up for potential movies, but with it just being a flop, I don't think we're ever going to go back to this universe. I don't think we're ever going to get a sequel to this. There was a lot of good potential, but for me, the movie did fall flat on its face. And again, I kind of wish I had Dory's Memories with this, because I kind of want to just have my memory of Buzz Lightyear from the Toy Story movies rather than from this movie. So this, again, with Lightyear, it's going to go on the I Wish I Had Dory's Memories. I would still say that it's better than Turning Red in my personal opinion, but I definitely feel like this was like one of the weaker points in Pixar Studio with the Lightyear movie. Okay, now next up on the list, we've got Luca, a movie which I don't think it came out in theaters. I think it was only released on Disney Plus, which I think was a big mistake. This and the next movie, Soul, I really do think that it should have come out in theaters. But when it comes to like Luca, I actually did try watching it when it first came out, but I don't know why, but for some reason the first 15-20 minutes I couldn't get into the movie. But then upon rewatching it now in the build up to this video, I actually did enjoy this movie. It was surprisingly good, surprisingly entertaining, and had a lot of like deep emotional story beats to it, especially when you've got Luca and Alberto and their dynamic with the two of them, and like the relationship you get with them being sea creatures to how the humans are interacting. I thought the villain of the movie as well was really entertaining and really funny at times, and just the whole story point of how they're going to enter this race and the whole third act between the race, I think worked really well. And even that dynamic with Alberto and that dad of the girl, I was really surprised about that. So this movie actually did catch me off guard, and honestly is actually one I would recommend. So when it comes to Luca, this one for me is going to be one for the ages. a really entertaining, enjoyable movie that has a lot of deep-rooted meaning to it, has a lot of great emotional beats, especially when it comes to like the ending too, when you've got like these characters revealing themselves to actually be sea creatures living amongst the humans. I thought it was really well handled. So yeah, Luca's going to be going for one for the ages for me. Now next up on the list is one, again, I just mentioned how it doesn't come out in theaters. I think this one came out in 2020 during like COVID times, which I think was a huge mistake. I really feel like this one deserved to be seen on the big screen, which is Soul. This one was fantastic to watch. Remember watching it for the first time on Disney Plus, and I love the story beats with it. You've got the main character here who is being played by Jamie Foxx, and I really like this story point of it. You go from him going into the afterlife, and you kind of have this selfish characteristics that you've got, and then you've got the character of 22 not wanting to join the human world, but then what she ends up being Jamie Foxx's character, and Jamie Foxx being the cat, and you've got that great chemistry. You're really rooting for the 22 character, and I really enjoyed what they did with that, especially the dynamic between Jamie Foxx playing the cat and then Tina Fey, who plays 22, playing the Jamie Foxx character, and you just get this root of how this character is trying to find her spark, what her story or her purpose is in this world, and it just works really well. It's like a very unique movie that you don't really get to see in Pixar or any of like these animated movies, but I just love what they did with this movie and how the story progressed, and especially towards like the third act with these characters getting these revelations towards themselves, especially with 22 and the character journey that Jamie Foxx's character goes through. This movie was very impactful, and again, I really wish it came out on the big screens. Since it is on Disney Plus, I do hope a lot of people did check it out. So for me, when it comes to Soul, this one again is going to be one for the ages. I do rate it more than Luca because of how I enjoyed the story and how I enjoyed the character journey that both the characters of Jamie Foxx and 22 go through. So definitely one for the ages for me. Okay, now next for me is Onward, where you've got the story of two brothers trying to go on this quest, this journey to try and bring their dad back to life for one day. I'll be honest, I never heard of this movie and never saw this movie before, but honestly, this movie absolutely surprised me with how the story goes. So you've got like the two brothers, you've got the older one and the younger one. They're trying to bring the dead back to life, who's basically a magician. Magic sort of faded during their time, and so they find like the letter that their dad left them. The younger brother ends up using the staff that the dad left for them to try and bring the dad back for one day. However, the spell kind of backfired, so you only got the legs of the dad. So they're trying to go on this quest to find this gem so that they can try and restore the rest of the dad's body. And there is so much emotional story beats to this plot, to this movie. There are some great characteristic moments, some great heartfelt moments. A movie that I absolutely enjoyed and absolutely blew me away because of the story that you go for with the brothers' dynamic and their chemistry with one another. The situation you've got with like the mum meeting up with like this Manitou, I think that's what they're called, like this lion horse creature thingy. You've got them going on this journey, and just this plot of trying to have one more day with their dad who passed away, especially because of the younger brother who never actually met the dad. And so there's just so much emotion with this story, and so much great twists and turns that you get with this movie. So much great character development and so much great chemistry and dynamic with like the younger brother realizing what the older brother means to him, the older brother getting that one last moment with the dad. There's a random dragon fight sequence towards like the third act. So a movie that actually caught me so much off guard with how much I enjoyed it and how much I would honestly highly recommend it. So when it comes to Onwards, once again, this one for me is going to be one for the ages. A really, really good movie that honestly did surprise me with how much I had fun with this movie. Okay, now next up on the list we've got Coco. I'll be honest, this one I have so much fun with. I really enjoy it. The final sequence, like the third act with Coco singing to the grandma, always gets me and always hits that emotional beat for me. This story really works so well. It's such a unique story going into like the afterlife. There's a lot of great moments in there. There's some great songs in there. So a movie that I really have a lot of fun with. And like I said, that third act, that emotional beat that you get with that third act really hits home for me. So I really enjoyed Coco. I think that this is a movie that you have to check out if you haven't seen it, because the whole plot that you go with, there's some great twists, some great turns, some great reveals in this movie as well. So for me, when it comes to Coco, this one is going to go as Pixar's gold standard. A movie that I would go back and rewatch countless times and it will still hit home for me. I will always enjoy the soundtrack in this movie, and again, I will always enjoy that character dynamic, and especially what happens towards like the third act, what happens between Coco and his grandma. That's top tier writing when it comes to Pixar, so definitely one of the gold standards. Okay, now next up on the list we've got The Good Dinosaur. I'll be honest, I've never heard of this movie before. I have not seen anybody really talk about this movie before, but really this movie is actually pretty entertaining and pretty emotional at times, because this movie, it's not dialogue heavy or anything like that. You follow this dinosaur and this baby who is sort of like a caveman baby, and you're following the two of them working together. The baby doesn't say a single word whatsoever, so you're basically relying on the dinosaur Arlo to do the heavy lifting when it comes to like the dialogue. There are some slow moments at times. The movie pacing is a little bit off at times, but there are some really great sequences, especially towards like the ending, because these two are trying to find their way home. And so towards like the third act, there's some great moments. There's a really powerful scene, I think, when they're talking about how they've lost people that they love, because you've got the situation of like the baby not being able to talk, but you know that the baby understands the dinosaur, so you're having the dinosaur draw like on the sand of like who he's lost. The baby ends up understanding and doing and drawing who he's lost. So there's some really great powerful scenes in this movie, but I feel like because it's weighing a lot on the dinosaur to carry this movie, the movie has a bit of flaws, especially because of like the story, because you can only do so much with the two of them trying to find their way back. So obviously they're running into a lot of trouble, and so the movie kind of like drags a bit towards like that third act, between like the second act and the third act. So for me, when it comes to The Good Dinosaur, I would say this one is good, but not that great. It definitely has its flaws, but honestly, it is enjoyable at times, especially, like I said, some emotional scenes and some powerful sequences that you get between the two of them. Even when there's no dialogue, there is a lot of fun to be had. Okay, now next up on the list, the most recent one, the one I just went to see, which is Inside Out 2. This one, I really had an enjoyable time with it. I think that this one, a lot of people are saying is like the best Pixar movie of the last 10 years. This is such a great follow-up. I will say I do enjoy the first one more than I did enjoy the second one, with this one still being a good story. However, I feel like with the emotion of anxiety being that sole focus, it kind of took away from the other new emotions that I wish we got to explore a little bit more with, especially with like embarrassment, because you're focusing a lot on the older emotions as well as like the new emotion of anxiety, so a lot of things do get left behind, and especially with like the characteristics that you get with Riley and what she's going through, especially in the movie, I wish we got to explore that a little bit more. But the whole situation with like the older emotions, like with joy and disgust and fear and anger and like them, I wish we got to sort of have similar journeys between like the first movie and this one. But still a really, really good movie. Like Pixar really knocked it out of the park when it comes to this movie. In terms of like a personal level, this one is like the first movie that my son, my 3-year-old, was able to go watch in the theaters for the very first time. So it will still hold a special place in my heart, but one you can have a lot of fun with. So yeah, when it comes to Inside Out 2, this one for me is gonna go as one for the ages. I would put it just behind Soul and Onwards. I would think it's better than Luca, but because of the emotional beats that you do get with like Onwards and Soul, I think it ranks just a bit higher than Inside Out 2. But however, with Inside Out 2, there is a really great sequence towards like the third act where you get anxiety turning into the Flash. If you haven't seen the movie, I won't give too much away, but there's some really great moments with that. But still a really, really good, enjoyable movie that if you've seen the first one, you will really enjoy the second one. Okay, now for the next one we've got is Brave. I'll be honest, similar to like Turning Red, this movie didn't really resonate with me. You've got this girl who's going up against her mum. Her mum wants her to like choose a prince to get her hand in marriage, where the girl objects to it. She finds a witch in the forest. This witch gives her like this curse wish thingy that ends up having the mum turn into a bear. I really wasn't following this movie. I couldn't really get invested into this movie whatsoever, just because the whole story point of the mum and daughter, you get a lot of predictable elements to it. If you've seen one Disney movie, you've seen them all when it comes to like these types of storylines, with the mum and daughter finally talking, understanding one another, and that's how everything gets resolved. And then you've even got like the whole situation with the whole men looking for the girl's hand in marriage, just having like random scenes just to be part of the movie itself. So not really a strong movie in my personal opinion. So when it comes to Brave, I would honestly say that I wish I had Dory's memories when it comes to this one. I still think it's better than Turning Red, but still not a great memorable movie for me, and one I definitely wouldn't go back and rewatch. Okay, now the next movie we've got is Up. This one I think has a great story, a really good wacky plot. You've got a grandpa who gets a whole bunch of balloons to get his house in the air, and then you've got this kid following this grandpa. I've seen a lot of like mixed reviews when it comes to like, especially because everybody's talking about Pixar movies, people having like these hot takes of how Up isn't really that great. I'll be honest, I completely disagree. Up has such an emotional heartbeat to it with the grandpa and his story and his journey that he goes through, especially because you do get flashbacks of his life. And so I think that this movie does work a lot. It has some great emotional sequences to it. There's a lot of heart to this movie, a lot of soul to this movie, that I feel like if you watch it, you do get attached to this and you do see the emotional side of this movie. And honestly, I can't see the hate that it does get at times from what I've seen online. When it comes to Up, this one, once again, I would have to say is one for the ages. I would have to say it's better than Soul, Inside Out 2 and Luca. I would still think Onwards is slightly better because of the emotional attachment you get with the two brothers, but Up still is a fantastic movie that I really, really enjoy with. Okay, now next up on the list we've got WALL-E. I remember watching, like, my school showing this movie to us as a kid. I haven't really gone back and watched it for a while, but upon rewatching it, man, I forgot how great this movie is. This really has a lot of emotional beats to it, especially towards like that ending when you think that Wally really lost his memories and you get that like scare of that. But then this whole plot, you get like a bit of, I wouldn't say social commentary or anything like that, but you do get sort of like the human elements of like what's happened to Earth and everything like that. So kind of like a little bit of commentary towards like the human race in terms of like how it's going when it comes to like the Earth right now, especially because this movie came out a really, really long time ago. But I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I really enjoyed with WALL-E, again, like not so much dialogue heavy when it comes to like this movie, but still a lot of great moments, a lot of great memorable scenes that you get from this. And WALL-E for me is like an instant classic. So yeah, when it comes to WALL-E, this one is gonna, for me, go as Pixar's gold standard. A movie that you have to see in your lifetime because it's such a great movie where you're rooting for this robot that doesn't really talk much, but you just watch them through their actions and through what they're going through to really root for this character and have such an enjoyable story with it. So yeah, WALL-E is for me another Pixar gold standard. Okay, now next up on the list is we've got Ratatouille, a unique movie where you've got a rat becoming a chef. And this movie, I've seen it countless times. It makes me want to do a lot more cooking after watching this movie. This one has a lot of great moments in there. You get a lot of great sequences with, like, of course, the rat making these recipes with like the human character that you're focusing in on. I do enjoy this movie, but for me it's not one of those movies that I will constantly go back and rewatch from Pixar. It's like a memorable movie for me because when you think of Ratatouille, you don't think of like the actual dish itself, you more think of this movie. And like I said, there are some great moments in this movie when it comes to like the mouse, when it comes to the chef and like that chemistry and that dynamic, especially because you get a little bit of like disconnect towards like the latter half of the movie. But overall, a movie that I would highly recommend if you haven't checked out. A movie that I've shown my son and he actually really enjoys it. So a great fun movie that is actually a really enjoyable family movie that you can honestly get behind these characters. So when it comes to Ratatouille, this one for me is going as one for the ages. I still would put it just above Luca, but I feel like the other movies like Onward, Up, Soul, Inside Out 2 are still slightly better for me over Ratatouille. Okay, so next up we've got the Cars trilogy movie with Owen Wilson doing a fantastic Lightning McQueen movie. I've seen this movie countless times. My son is obsessed with this movie, so I've seen all three movies so many times. So we'll start off with Cars 3. I do feel like this one gets a lot of hate. It's not as great as the very first Cars movie, but it's still, there are a lot of good moments in it. Especially when you've got like that third act with Cruz Ramirez taking over Lightning McQueen to take on Jackson Storm in that race and the moves that she's pulling off. So you get a lot of good like moments in this. You do see this point of the plot where you've got like Lightning McQueen, who's sort of like this older car now, who can't keep up with like the younger generation. So there are some good elements to the story in itself, and like I said, some memorable sequences, especially with that third act. Now, while I do think it is overhated slightly, it's still probably the weakest of the whole trilogy. So when it comes to Cars 3, I'll have to say this is probably a one-time watch for me, because out of the three, I would probably go and rewatch the first movie over the other two movies. And out of the other two movies, I probably lean towards the second movie more than the third movie. So yeah, Cars 3 is going to go as a one-time watch. Next up on the list, we have got Cars 2 again, another movie that I feel like is slightly overhated. While it is a complete different type of tone when it comes to like the very first movie, having the focus on Mater, I think was a really nice touch. So you got Francesco as like the antagonist of the movie. You've got like the spy element, which I know a lot of people aren't fans of. I wasn't really intrigued more with like that spy element, which I think they could have done something different. But what they did with the movie, what they pulled off with the movie, especially with like the reveal at the end and how it all gets concluded, I don't think was too bad. I still think they could have done something completely different with the movie, but still, a movie that's not the worst movie I'll ever see. But I do think it's still one of the weaker movies in there. So yeah, when it comes to Cars 2, while I do think it's slightly better than Cars 3, I would have to say this is, for me, a one-time watch. As if you're going to pick through all three Cars movies, you're going to go with the very first one. So speaking of the very first one, I will have to say that this movie really is a great movie, a really unique, interesting, intelligent movie, because you've got the characters like Lightning McQueen and what his personality goes through, his character journey from having this cocky attitude to being humbled with these characters that he's meeting, like Sally, Mater, Doc Hudson especially, and like that dynamic and chemistry between the two of them. I really feel like the voice casting, as well as having Owen Wilson as Lightning McQueen, was a stroke of genius, because he really brings out that like calm tone you get as like the voice acting. And so overall, a really fun, memorable movie that for me, I would have to say is one for the ages. I will definitely put it as like the best of the bunch so far for the one for the ages, because of the plot, because of the characters, because of the voice casting. A really good movie. And even Mac too, just that voice casting for Mac as well, I think was a stroke of genius. Okay, so next up we've got is Incredibles 2. One, I feel like the sequel was supposed to come out a lot sooner than it did. I think it came out 2 years ago, if I'm right. I think it came out in 2022 or 2023, one of those dates. I could be completely wrong, but it's been so long since the very first movie came out. Now, I do think this movie is good, but I wasn't a huge fan of the whole story point, especially because you've got these superheroes who are trying to be legal, and then you've got like the villain of the movie, like Elastigirl, going after this villain, which I don't think is like a really strong villain. And third act was pretty good. I loved like the whole dynamic between like Bob, the dad, finding out that Jack has powers, and that whole dynamic and that chemistry, him trying to balance being like a stay-at-home dad, I think was pretty funny to watch. But I don't think, as if we're doing sequels, I think they could have gone with like a completely different route with this movie. So while I do think that it is a strong sequel, I think there were better routes to go with this, especially when it comes to like the villain side of things. But I like that you got Violet and Dash having their moments to shine. Frozen being a lot more involved in this movie, I think, was better. But for me, when it comes to The Incredibles 2, I would have to say it's good, but not great. Because I feel like they could have done a lot more with this movie, a lot more with the characters. Because compared to like the very first one, like the first Incredibles movie, this one is like the very first movie I actually got to see in the cinemas with my parents, with my brother and sister. And I still remember just being obsessed with this movie. I remember getting the video game, I remember getting the toys that was coming out when this movie released. And I really love not only the villain, but the whole story point. You're getting these characters, you're getting to know these characters, you're seeing how they're progressing when it comes to like their storyline. Especially when you've got that whole sequence when you've got Elastigirl, you've got the two kids. As soon as they get on that plane and go to the island, I think the movie really starts picking up. So a movie that you just have so much fun with, I can just go back and rewatch so many times because it's an instant classic for me. So yeah, when it comes to The Incredibles, the very first movie, I would have to say it's Pixar's gold standard. I would still say that Coco is slightly ahead of it, but Incredibles, incredible movie, no pun intended. Now, next one we've got on the list is Finding Dory. I'll be honest, I do think this sort of is like an unnecessary movie as you're focusing in on Dory, but it's sort of similar plot when it comes to Finding Nemo, whereas this one it's Dory looking for her parents. Now, I do think that there are some good elements to this, and there is a lot of enjoyment to be had with this movie. If we're focusing in on Dory versus Nemo, I do prefer Finding Nemo over Finding Dory. Dory, I've seen it twice. Once when it first came out, and then once upon rewatching it for this video. And I'll have to say, I still think for me, Finding Dory is a one-time watch. I still put it slightly ahead of Cars 3. I still think that this movie is just way too similar to Finding Nemo. And I do think that Finding Nemo is probably the one to go for rather than Finding Dory. But speaking of Finding Nemo, this one was such a unique movie, having a movie focusing in on a fish, getting lost, watching this countless times as a kid. I remember they put it on in school. My mom put it on for me many times. And I do think that this movie is just so memorable and so unique with the fish. And every time I see an orange fish in real life, I always think of Finding Nemo. That's how much the movie had an impact on me. I really enjoyed the premise of the movie. I really enjoyed the execution of this movie. And it just had so much satisfying conclusion to it, so much satisfying parts of the movie that this one, like I said, is a lot better. I don't think Finding Dory was really needed with this one because Finding Nemo was such an instant classic and for me still holds up. I would have to put Finding Nemo. For me, this one is, again, Pixar's gold standard. I still put it ahead of WALL-E, but not ahead of Incredibles or Coco. But for me, one of the better Pixar movies that they have produced. Okay, now next up on the list, we've got Monsters, Inc. University. This is sort of like a prequel to Monsters, Inc. I would have honestly preferred a sequel from Monsters, Inc. rather than a prequel, because this is where you get to see Mike Wazowski and Sully, how they got to know each other, how they became best friends, especially because when this movie first came out and you got the reveal of like Randy being Mike Wazowski's roommate and that whole dynamic, especially with what happens with like Monsters, Inc. the first movie, that was such a unique, clever twist to the movie. But then this whole like campus university having like these sororities or whatever the hell you want to call them, I think that it was pretty good, especially because it's like a competition based type of movie where you've got these characters going into competition to try and become like scarers. There was a lot of callbacks to the very first movie, so I definitely do think that there was a lot of fun to be had with this. I do say that there are a couple of flaws with it, but still a movie to have a lot of fun with. So when it comes to Monsters, Inc. University, this one for me, I would have to say, is actually one for the ages. I would still put it slightly ahead of Luca, just because I am more attached to like the Monsters, Inc. characters, like Mike and Sully, and even like the characters in their sorority. I found them so entertaining. Okay, now coming up next, we've got A Bug's Life. I'll be honest, I saw half of this movie as a kid, but then I never went back to watching it again. I know that they made an appearance in Toy Story in like the blooper section, but then I've not really went to go back and watch this movie. However, rewatching it now, this movie was so entertaining, so hilarious. You've got a bunch of ants taking on these grasshoppers and having these circus acts joining in to try and take on these grasshoppers. I thought was such a unique premise. The movie really works well. I feel like the movie just flies by when it comes to like the runtime, when it comes to like the pacing, especially it's such a unique movie. And that third act with the ants uprising, taking on these grasshoppers, I thought was a really stroke of genius. There are a lot of like twists and turns you get with this movie, and one movie that really does stick out, especially because it's just a bunch of ants. So I'll have to say, for me, when it comes to A Bug's Life, one for the ages, just between Cars and onwards, because for me, I watched it more recently rather than growing up with this movie. Okay, now for next up we've got is the Monsters, Inc. movie. The very first one, the one that came out in 2004, I believe it was. This one, I've seen it countless times. It's still a movie that holds up to this day. I love the premise where you've got like these monsters going into these kids' rooms, scaring the crap out of these kids as if it's normal for people to do that. And just having this storyline of like this little girl coming into like the monster world with them freaking out first and then trying to help this girl. And like that whole twist of like Randall and the big spider character, which Waternoose, I think his name was, being the villains of the movie, and it's just the whole story and the whole journey that these characters go through, especially with like Sully and Boo. This is what I was saying, that I feel like there should be a sequel with like Boo being slightly older now and then having her end up into like the monster world once again somehow, some way, because right now you've got a prequel to the Monster Inc. movie and then you've got like this spin-off TV series which isn't bad, but I would rather have a sequel with like these characters focusing on that rather than what they're doing so far with the Monster Inc. universe. So yeah, when it comes to like Monsters Inc., definitely for me this one is going as Pixar's gold standard. I'll have to say it's a lot better than most of the Pixar movies, but I still put Incredibles and Coco slightly ahead, but it's still a really, really good movie. Okay, so next up I want to focus on Elemental. This one coming out last year. I do feel like this movie is slightly hated based on like the reviews. I've seen a lot of people like not really fans of it. I can kind of understand for me because I do enjoy the plot of this movie. I love like the animation style of this movie especially. Definitely think it's one of the movies that do stand out with Pixar. When it comes to like the whole plot of the movie, when you've got like fire and water trying to mix together, trying to be like in a relationship, kind of hinting to similarities to like real life, obviously not being a fire person or a water person, but like different cultures and different beliefs. I think that works really well because I have got like experience when it comes to that. So that for me kind of hit home. I do say that the movie kind of drags on slightly towards like that third act. The movie isn't as strong as it could have been, but I do think that it is a great movie that I'm glad it was able to be seen on the big screen, because especially with a whole summer blockbuster situation going on with like June, July last year, this one kind of got lost in the shuffle. But I still highly recommend it if you haven't checked it out, because there are some great moments to be had with this. So when it comes to Elemental, this one for me is going to be one for the ages. I think it's probably the weakest one of the one for the ages. I still think the other previous movies are a lot more stronger than it. But I do think that this is a really, really good movie that you should be checking out if you haven't already, because there are a lot of good elements to it, no pun intended. Okay, now next up on the list is we've got the original Inside Out movie. This one, like I said, I do prefer it over the sequel. There are so many good moments with this, especially when you've got like these core beliefs, these core emotions with anger and sadness and joy and fear and disgust. The whole situation where you've got like the story point focusing in on joy and sadness and their adventure that's going on, you've got more of like stakes when it comes to like Riley's character, because in the second one you do focus on her journey as trying to become a hockey player, whereas in the first one you've got her running away from home and just that whole journey of that situation and trying to rescue sadness and joy to stop Riley from doing something so stupid, which I do think is what gets this movie so high stakes, so intense, so emotional at times. So there is a lot of good moments to be had, and especially like the characters too, the emotions, focusing in on just those five and just having all of them getting their chance to shine really gets that emotional beat going for this movie. So when it comes to Inside Out, I would have to say this one is one of Pixar's gold standard. I think it's slightly better than Finding Nemo and WALL-E. So yeah, it's going to go as Pixar's gold standard because there is a lot of good moments in this. But we finally come to like the Toys R Us franchise. So I'm going to work my way backwards when it comes to this. So when it comes to Toy Story 4, granted there's going to be a Toy Story 5, I do like the journey and the ending of Toy Story 4, where you've got Woody finally just releasing himself from like being a toy, especially when you've got that one line in Toy Story 1 of Woody and Buzz arguing and Woody saying that he is just a toy. So I like that they kind of went full circle with it. Buzz and Woody getting that emotional goodbye with one another, Bo Peep coming back, and then Woody reuniting with Bo Peep. There are some funny characters that you get with Keanu Reeves' character, the bird, and I forgot what that other creature was. Like, those new characters I think worked well. While I do prefer Toy Story 3's ending, I do enjoy Toy Story 4 ending. And while I do think the whole plot of like the girl being attached to a spork, like the one that she made, kind of goes like more on the goofier side of things here, but there is some good moments to be had. So I'll have to say when it comes to Toy Story 4, this one I would say is good, but not great. Definitely the weakest out of the whole 4 movies. But when you got Toy Story 3, like I said, this one had the perfect ending with Andy giving away his toys to this little girl. Was so emotional. You had that big sequence where you've got like these toys, all these characters in like that fire pit where they're all looking like they're about to like be burned to a crisp. Goosebump sequence there. The whole storyline and the whole plot of this movie worked well. You've got a lot of quite great beats to this movie, so there's a lot of enjoyment, and definitely for me the best way to end this whole trilogy. But now that they're doing Toy Story 4, they're doing Toy Story 5, I feel like that it's kind of taken away from that ending especially. But I still think that this movie really is such a solid movie, and like I said, the perfect send-off to Andy and the toys, especially with that ending, the best ending that you could ask for. So when it comes to Toy Story 3, for me, this one is definitely one for the ages. I think it's the best one out of the one for the ages. So yeah, for me, Toy Story 2 is probably, I'm just going to say this now, is my favourite Pixar movie that they have done. This is one of the best sequels that you'll get from a movie. It's such a great movie, focusing in on Woody, the Chicken Man. You've got that whole sequence with the third act at the airport. You've got Jesse and Bullseye being added to this. You've got the villain of the Prospector trying to stop Woody from going back and reuniting with Andy. Just the whole movie itself with these characters I thought worked so well. I love the whole situation with like Buzz, this toy Buzz that they find at the toy store, tagging along with these characters, having this whole meeting with Zurg, the 3 aliens being rescued by Potato Head. This movie is, for me, hands down the best Pixar movie, so we'll waste little time with this one. This one, for me, is Pixar's goldest standard, the best of the bunch. A really great movie that, if you haven't seen it, honestly, what are you doing? Watch Toy Story 1, watch Toy Story 2, because these movies are so great. Because we get to the final movie of the Pixar studio, which is the very first Toy Story movie. This, for me, is one of my earliest movies that I've watched. This one with Tarzan and Lion King were the 3 movies that I've watched for the very first time as movies as a kid. I was so shocked at this movie, especially because as a kid, watching these toys come to life, spying on my own toys to like make sure that they're not coming to life. And I know I'm not the only one that did that, so don't be judging me in the comment section down below for doing that, because when you're a kid and you see these toys come to life, you know for a fact that your toys are coming to life as well. But the whole journey between Buzz and Woody, and just them focusing on their characters, especially because you've got Buzz who thinks he's like a real Buzz Lightyear, Woody who's a toy, they end up going into Sid, this psychotic kid, and I just love like their chemistry, I love the dynamic. Woody and Buzz are two of the most iconic Pixar characters in the whole studios, in the whole franchise, in the whole of Disney era, because of their dynamic and their chemistry with one another. Then you get that whole car chase sequence in the third act, which I think works so well, to the point where like they end up flying and you've just got Woody and Buzz interacting, where Buzz finally acknowledges he's a toy, especially telling Woody that he's not flying, he's falling with style. So just so much memorable scenes from this movie, and so much great sequences, and just so much enjoyment you get from this. So again, Toy Story 1, for me, gold standard, Pixar's gold standard, the second best movie of the franchise, and the second best movie of Pixar as a whole. So for me, this is how I line up when it comes to all of Pixar's movies. So like I said, as you see it here, lately Pixar has had a lot of like misses, has had a lot of like movies that you kind of like want to forget about. But a lot of movies, Pixar has done a fantastic job. As you can see, like One for the Ages has the most movies, but Pixar's gold standards are incredibly solid. So again, these are just my thoughts, my opinions, my ranking of the Pixar movies. Please let me know in the comment section down below for the ones that you have seen. Do you agree with my list? Do you disagree with me? Let me know down in the comment section below. But I want to thank you all so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. This is YK Reviews, to infinity and beyond.